The reservation confirmation had arrived 3 weeks ago. Bella nodded, 7 p.m. Party of 12. Birthday celebration. Mom's 65th birthday. My sister Victoria had chosen the restaurant, of course. The most exclusive Italian dining experience in the city, where reservations required a 3-month wait, and entrees started at $75. I pulled into the parking garage in my 7-year-old Honda Civic, finding a spot between a Mercedes S-Class and a Tesla Model X. The contrast wasn't lost on me. I dressed simply, dark jeans, a charcoal sweater, comfortable flats, no jewelry except the watch my grandfather had given me before he died. Nothing that screamed success or wealth. The November air bit at my face as I walked the 2 blocks from the garage to the restaurant. Bella Nata occupied the ground floor of the Lancaster building, all floor-to-ceiling windows and warm golden light spilling onto the sidewalk. Through the glass, I could see the elegant dining room already filling with the early dinner crowd. Inside, the hostess looked up with a professional smile that flickered slightly when she saw my casual attire among the sea of cocktail dresses and suits in the waiting area. "Good evening. Do you have a reservation, Thompson Party?" I said. "I'm a bit early." Her fingers flew across the tablet. "Ah yes, the birthday celebration. You're actually the first to arrive. Would you like to wait at the bar, or shall I show you to your table?" "The table is fine." She led me through the main dining room, past tables draped in crisp white linens, past the exhibition kitchen, where I could see the line cooks moving with practiced precision. Our table was in the semi-private alcove near the back, the second best table in the house. 12 place settings, a small happy birthday Eleanor card, propped in the center among the votive candles. I took the seat facing the entrance. Old habit. The server appeared within 30 seconds. "Good evening. Can I start you with something to drink?" "Just water for now, thank you. I'll wait for the rest of my party." He nodded and disappeared. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through emails. A message from my restaurant group's CFO about the quarterly board meeting, another from my property manager about the new tenant lease in the Harbor District building. I answered them both quickly, then silenced my phone. They arrived in waves over the next 20 minutes. First Victoria and her husband Brandon, both dressed like they'd come from a corporate gala. Victoria's eyes swept over my outfit with barely concealed disapproval, but she said nothing, just air-kissed near my cheek, and claimed the seat at the head of the table. Then came my brother Marcus, with his wife Sophia, followed by my Aunt Patricia, and Uncle Robert. My cousin James arrived with his girlfriend Amber, both looking like they'd spent the afternoon at a country club. More family filtered in, my other cousin Lindsay, my uncle's business partner and his wife who always somehow ended up at family events. Mom arrived last, Dad holding her arm like she was made of glass. She wore a beautiful burgundy dress, her silver hair swept up elegantly. Everyone stood, there were hugs and birthday wishes. And finally we all settled into our seats. I ended up wedged between cousin James and Uncle Robert, directly across from Victoria. "Well," Victoria said once everyone had ordered drinks, "isn't this lovely? All of us together." The server distributed wine glasses, a 2015 Barolo, that Victoria had pre-selected for the table. When he reached me, I held up my hand. "Just sparkling water, please." Victoria's eyebrow arched. "Not drinking? Are you pregnant, or just economizing?" Light laughter rippled around the table. I smiled. "Just not in the mood tonight. Probably can't afford the wine anyway," James muttered to Amber, but loud enough for me to hear. More laughter, less light this time. The server returned with my sparkling water, and began taking dinner orders. The table buzzed with conversation about Victoria's recent promotion to senior vice president, Marcus's new boat, James's latest real estate investment, the kind of competitive wealth display that had characterized every family gathering for the past decade. When the server reached me, I ordered the roasted branzino. "Excellent choice," he said, and there was something in his voice, a warmth that hadn't been there for the other orders. But it passed quickly. After he left, James leaned back in his chair, wine glass in hand, studying me with an expression I recognized. The look he got right before saying something he thought was clever. "So Emma," he said, voice carrying across the conversation, "still doing that little what was it, consulting thing?" The table quieted. I took a sip of water. "Yes, still consulting." Right. He swirled his wine. Must be tough, in this economy. All these startups and small businesses struggling. I read an article just last week about how many consultants are barely scraping by. I manage, I said. Victoria jumped in, her voice dripping with what she probably thought was sisterly concern. Emma, Brandon's firm is hiring. Entry-level positions, sure, but it's stable. Benefits, 401k matching. I could put in a word. I appreciate that, but I'm fine with my current work. Are you though? This from Marcus, who'd apparently decided to join the pile on. I mean, look around. Do you see what you're wearing compared to everyone else? When's the last time you bought yourself something nice? I glanced down at my sweater. This is nice. It's comfortable. It's from Target, Sophia said, not unkindly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. I have the same one. Bought it on clearance for $19. The laughter was harder now, sharper. Mom looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. Dad was studying his menu intently. There's no shame in shopping budget-friendly, Aunt Patricia offered, which somehow made it worse. We all have to live within our means. Exactly my point, James said, warming to his topic now. He'd had 3 glasses of wine already. Living within your means, that's responsible. But Emma, he gestured around the dining room with his glass. How can you even afford to eat here? I mean really, my entree alone is $95. The wine Victoria ordered is $200 a bottle. This isn't exactly Olive Garden. The table had gone completely silent now. Everyone was looking at me, some with pity, some with barely disguised smugness, some with simple curiosity about how I'd respond. I cut a piece of the bread that had been placed on the table, and took a bite, chewed slowly, swallowed, took another sip of water. The bread is excellent, I said. I think they're using a sourdough starter that's at least 20 years old. You can taste the depth of the fermentation. James blinked. What? The bread, I repeated. It's exceptional quality. Chef Martinez has always been particular about his carbohydrates. You know the chef? Lindsay asked. We've met, I said simply. James wasn't ready to let it go. He leaned forward, and I could smell the wine on his breath. Okay, but seriously, Emma, this is a family dinner. We're all successful people here. Victoria just made SVP. Marcus bought a yacht. I just closed on a beach house in the Carolinas. And you show up in jeans and a Target sweater, ordering sparkling water, because you can't afford wine. And we're all supposed to pretend everything's fine. James' mom said softly. That's enough. No, Eleanor. It's not enough. He was on a roll now, gesturing expansively. We're family. We should be honest with each other. If Emma is struggling financially, we should help her. But we can't help if she keeps pretending she belongs in places like this. The cruelty of it hung in the air. Several family members looked away. Victoria had the decency to look mildly ashamed. But James just sat there, pleased with himself. You're right, I said quietly. We should be honest with each other. Finally, James said, admission is the first step. Now I actually know a guy who runs a staffing agency. Nothing glamorous, but steady work. I could make a call. The problem, I continued, isn't that I can't afford to be here. The problem is that you assume you understand my financial situation based on my clothing choices. It's not just your clothes, Sophia said. You drive that old Honda. You live in that tiny apartment in the industrial district. You never vacation with us when we go to Europe or the Caribbean. The industrial district, I smiled. Is that what you think? We've seen it, Victoria said. That converted warehouse on 5th and Morrison. Marcus drove past it once. He said it looked like a storage facility. It does look like that, I agreed. The appetizers arrived, distributed by a small army of servers working in synchronized precision. Burrata for Victoria, beef carpaccio for James, grilled octopus for Marcus. My appetizer was a special preparation, hand-cut tagliatelle, with white truffle and butter sauce, not on the menu. The server placed it in front of me, with a slight nod. Compliments of the chef, Miss Thompson. I thanked him. The table stared. Why did you get something special? Amber asked. I'm not sure, I said, twirling the pasta on my fork. Perhaps they recognized me from previous visits. Previous visits. James's voice had an edge now. You've been here before, multiple times. A few. How many is a few? I took a bite of the pasta. The truffle was perfect, earthy and complex. I don't keep count, The conversation moved on, but I could feel James watching me, his mood souring. He ordered another glass of wine, then another. By the time the entrees arrived, he was well past tipsy and heading toward drunk. My branzino was pristine, crispy skin, perfectly flaky flesh, accompanied by roasted fennel, and a citrus beer blanc. Around the table, the others received their dishes: filet mignon, lobster ravioli, osso buco, lamb chops. James had ordered the most expensive item on the menu, a 45-day dry-aged ribeye, with bone marrow butter. When it arrived, he took one bite, and immediately called the server over. "This is overcooked," he announced loudly. I ordered medium rare. "This is medium." The server, a young man named Alex, who I knew was working his way through culinary school, looked at the steak. "I apologize, sir. Would you like me to have the kitchen prepare you another?" "I want to speak to the chef," James said. "This is unacceptable. Do you know how much this costs?" James' mom said. "Please, it's fine. Just eat it." "No, Eleanor. It's not fine. We're paying premium prices here. We deserve premium quality." He looked around the table. "See, this is what I mean about understanding value. Some people," his eyes landed on me, "wouldn't know the difference between a properly cooked steak and shoe leather. But when you're successful, when you actually belong in places like this, you develop standards." Alex looked deeply uncomfortable. "Sir, I'll get the manager." "I don't want the manager. I want the chef, Chef Martinez." "Right. Get him out here. The chef is quite busy during service," Alex said carefully, "but I'm sure the manager can get the chef." The dining room had gone quiet. Other diners were watching now. I saw Alex's hands trembling slightly, as he nodded and retreated toward the kitchen. "You didn't need to do that," I said quietly to James. "Oh, here we go," he said. "Let me guess, you're going to lecture me about being nice to the help. That's rich, coming from someone who probably can't even tip properly." "I tip very well," I said. "On your imaginary consulting income." He laughed. "What do you even consult about, Emma? What expertise could you possibly have that anyone would pay for?" I was saved from answering by the appearance of a man in chef's whites emerging from the kitchen. Chef Antonio Martinez, 53 years old, third-generation restaurateur, trained in Naples and Lyon, recipient of 2 Michelin stars. He moved through the dining room with the easy confidence of someone who knew he was the best at what he did. He headed straight for our table, but he didn't stop at James. He walked past him, past Victoria, past Mom, and came to stand beside my chair. "Miss Thompson," he said warmly, "I heard there was some concern about the ribeye. Please allow me to apologize. This is unacceptable." During a family celebration, the table had gone completely still. "It's fine, Antonio," I said. "Really, it's barely noticeable." Nevertheless, he turned to James. "Sir, I will personally prepare you a new steak, medium rare, as you requested. And of course there will be no charge for your meal this evening." James was staring at me. You're on first-name basis with the chef." Antonio smiled. "Miss Thompson and I go back several years. She has excellent taste in food. Her suggestions for the menu are always—" He paused, seeming to realize he'd said too much. "Well, I'll get started on that steak." He started to turn away, then stopped. "Oh, Miss Thompson, I have those quarterly revenue reports you requested. The numbers are exceptional this period. Shall I bring them to you now, or would you prefer to review them after your celebration?" The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "Quarterly revenue reports." Victoria's voice was faint. I set down my fork. "After dinner is fine, Antonio." "Thank you." He nodded and disappeared back into the kitchen, leaving a silence so complete I could hear the soft jazz playing over the restaurant's sound system. James found his voice first. What was he talking about? Revenue reports. I dabbed my lips with my napkin. Exactly what he said. Quarterly revenue reports. For what? Marcus demanded. For the restaurant. Why would you need revenue reports for the restaurant? This from Victoria, her face pale. The same reason any business owner needs them. To track performance, identify trends, make informed decisions about operations and expansion. The words hung there. Business owner. I watched them process it, saw the exact moment comprehension dawned. No, James said. No way. You can't own Bella Not. I finished. I do. Have for the past 4 years. Well, technically my restaurant group owns it, but I'm the majority stakeholder in the group. So effectively, yes. Uncle Robert started laughing. Not the mocking laughter from earlier. This was the slightly hysterical laughter of someone whose entire understanding of reality had just shifted. You own this restaurant. You, the one we've all been mocking for being poor. I never said I was poor. I pointed out. You all assumed. The warehouse, Sophia whispered. The one on 5th and Morrison, is the headquarters for my restaurant group, Thompson Hospitality. We operate 6 restaurants currently, with 3 more in development. Bella Not is the flagship, but we also own Riverside Bistro, the Garden Room, and Merchant's Table downtown, plus Coastal Kitchen and Harbor House in the Bay Area. Victoria was shaking her head slowly. Those are some of the best restaurants in the state. Thompson Hospitality, that's you, Emma Thompson, Emma Louise Thompson. Yes, though I usually keep a low profile. Bad for business when the owner's presence makes diners self-conscious. The Honda, Marcus said numbly. The cheap clothes. The Honda is reliable and paid off. Why would I take on a car payment for something that just depreciates? And these clothes are comfortable. I spend most of my time in kitchens and offices. I don't need designer labels for that. Mom was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Pride, shock, hurt that I'd never told her. James had gone very pale. The wine, he said. The $200 wine Victoria ordered. Wholesale costs me $43 per bottle. Retail markup is standard for the industry. And my steak costs the restaurant about $19 to produce, including the bone marrow butter and sides. Food cost percentage is 22% across the menu. So when I complained about the quality, you were complaining to someone who personally approved every supplier we work with, who has tasted every item on the menu at least a dozen times during development, and who knows that your steak was cooked exactly to temperature, because I watched Alex verify it with a thermometer before it left the pass. The server appeared with James's new steak. He set it down silently and retreated. Nobody spoke. I think I said, into the silence, we should address something. James, you asked me earlier how I could afford to eat here. The answer is that I can afford to eat here because I own here. But more importantly, you asked that question as an insult. You wanted to embarrass me in front of our family. You wanted to establish some kind of hierarchy where you were successful and I was struggling. Emma. He started. I'm not finished. You all made assumptions about my life based on external appearances. My car, my clothes, my address. None of you thought to ask about my actual circumstances. None of you considered that maybe I had reasons for my choices that had nothing to do with financial limitation. But you never said anything. Victoria protested. You let us believe. I never confirmed your beliefs. I interrupted. You all constructed a narrative about my life without my input, and tonight you were all comfortable with that narrative, comfortable enough to mock me publicly, to offer me charity, to suggest I didn't belong in a nice restaurant. Mom found her voice. Sweetheart, we didn't know. Would it have mattered if you did? Should it matter? Is the only value I have to this family tied to my bank account? The question lingered unanswered. Antonio returned, iPad in hand. Forgive the interruption. Miss Thompson, the architect's office just sent over the revised plans for the Morrison Street expansion. They need your approval by tomorrow morning, if we want to stay on schedule. I took the iPad, scrolling through the designs. 3 floors of the Morrison Street warehouse converted into a culinary incubator, professional kitchens for rent, business development support, a farm-to-table market on the ground floor. My passion project. These look good. Tell them to proceed. I handed back the iPad. Antonio, my family and I need a few minutes. Could you have the sommelier bring us something special? Your choice. Of course. And Miss Thompson, happy birthday to your mother. The tiramisu course is on me. After he left, I turned back to the table. I want to be clear about something. I'm not angry that you didn't know about my success. I'm disappointed that you were so comfortable with my perceived failure. Not one of you offered genuine help, just pity and judgment. I offered to help you get a job, Victoria said weakly. You offered to get me an entry-level position at your husband's firm because you thought I was desperate. That's not help. That's condescension wrapped in family obligation. James had his head in his hands. When he looked up, his eyes were red. I've been talking about my beach house all night. The one I bought, that I'm so proud of. The Carolina coast. I said. I remember. You could buy that entire beach. Probably not the entire beach. But yes, I could afford your beach house. I paused. James, your success is valid. Your beach house is an accomplishment. But it doesn't become more impressive by diminishing someone else's situation. Real confidence doesn't need comparison. The sommelier arrived with a bottle. A 1998 Barolo, one of our most expensive wines. He poured for everyone, including me this time. Mom raised her glass with shaking hands. I think, she said carefully, that we owe Emma an apology. I owe her an apology. I sat here and let everyone mock my daughter. And I said nothing. You told James to stop, I pointed out. Once, quietly. I should have shut it down immediately. She looked around the table. We all should have. Family protects family. We didn't protect you tonight. You thought I didn't need protection, because I wasn't worth protecting. I said. Not consciously. Maybe. But that's what your silence meant. Dad finally spoke, his voice rough. Your grandfather would be ashamed of us. He taught us that character isn't measured by bank accounts. We forgot that tonight. Grandpa knew, I said. About the restaurants. He invested early. Before he died, made me promise to keep building. To stay humble. To remember where I came from. I smiled sadly. I think he'd be proud that I kept the promise. And disappointed in how tonight went. The entrees sat cooling on the table. Mostly untouched now. The birthday celebration had transformed into something else entirely. A reckoning, perhaps. Marcus cleared his throat. What happens now? I mean, are we still family? Of course we're still family, I said. But maybe we need to redefine what that means. Being family shouldn't mean being comfortable with cruelty. It shouldn't mean assumptions and judgments. It should mean actually knowing each other. I don't know anything about your life, Victoria said softly. I thought I did, but I don't. I don't know how you built all this. I don't know what you care about beyond the restaurants. I don't even know if you're happy. I am happy, I said. I love what I do. I love creating spaces where people celebrate their lives. Birthdays, anniversaries, proposals. I love developing young chefs, giving them opportunities. I love the business side too. The strategy and growth. It fulfills me. Why didn't you tell us? Lindsay asked. She'd been quiet all evening. Not to brag or anything. Just why? Keep it secret. Initially because I wanted to build something on my own merit, without family connections or expectations. Grandpa understood that. Later because I realized our family had become so focused on status, that my success would just become another comparison point. Another thing to compete over. So you let us think you were failing, James said. You didn't sound angry anymore. Just tired. To avoid the competition. To maintain my peace. I corrected. I have enough competition in my professional life. I wanted my family to be a refuge from that, not another battlefield. But we made it a battlefield anyway, Uncle Robert said. By judging you. Yes. The sommelier returned to refill glasses. The other diners had gone back to their own meals. The drama at our table concluded. In the kitchen I knew the line cooks were preparing desserts. The special tiramisu Antonio had mentioned, probably with extra flourishes. I have a question, Amber said suddenly. She'd been silent most of the evening. If you own all these successful restaurants, why do you still dress like you're on a budget? And not judging, she added quickly. I'm genuinely curious. I considered the question. A few reasons. 1. I told you. Comfort and practicality. 2. I learned early that expensive clothes don't make you more competent or valuable. They're just clothes. 3. And maybe most importantly, I never want to lose touch with what things actually cost. My restaurants serve everyone from college students, saving up for a special date, to executives on expense accounts. If I start living in a bubble of luxury, I lose perspective on the customers who stretch their budgets to eat with us. That's remarkably grounded. Mom said. Grandpa's influence. I said. He built his construction business from nothing. Never forgot what it felt like to check his bank account before buying groceries. Told me that wealth should expand your empathy, not shrink it. The desserts arrived. Individual tiramisus in delicate glass cups, each one a work of art. The table fell silent as we ate, everyone lost in their own thoughts. Finally, James pushed his empty dessert cup away and looked at me directly. I'm sorry, he said. Truly, what I said tonight was cruel and unnecessary. I don't have an excuse. I think I was trying to feel important by making you feel small. That's ugly. I'm ashamed of myself. I appreciate that, I said. Can I ask you something? And please be honest. Okay. Are you going to ban me from your restaurants? Because I deserve it. I laughed, surprising myself. No, James. I'm not going to ban you. But maybe next time you visit one of my establishments, you'll treat the servers with more respect. I will. I swear. He paused. The Morrison Street Project. The culinary incubator. That's incredible. Are you looking for investors? Always. But let's talk about that another time. Tonight is about Mom. Mom smiled at me across the table, tears in her eyes. This has been the most memorable birthday I've ever had. Not exactly what I expected, but memorable. Happy birthday, Mom, I said, raising my glass. To family, the messy, complicated, sometimes painful, but ultimately worth it family. Everyone raised their glasses. We toasted. We finished our wine. Slowly, conversation resumed, tentative at first, then gradually more natural. People asked genuine questions about the restaurants, about my work, about my life. I answered honestly, watched my family begin to see me as a complete person, rather than their assumptions about me. When the check came, presented in a leather folder to Victoria, who'd made the reservation, I quietly intercepted it. The total was over $2,000. I added my employee code, and a generous tip for Alex, who'd handled James's behavior with grace. Dinner is on me, I announced. Family discount. Emma, you don't have to. Victoria started. I want to. It's Mom's birthday. Besides, I smiled. I get a pretty good deal on the food here. As we gathered our things to leave, Antonio appeared one final time. He handed me a folder with the quarterly reports, then surprised everyone by presenting Mom with a beautiful box. A gift from Bella Not, he said. A selection of our house-made pastas and sauces, for you to enjoy at home. Mom was delighted. She thanked him profusely. As we walked toward the exit, I fell into step beside her. Are you upset with me? I asked quietly. For not telling you. She took my arm. I'm upset with myself, for not knowing my own daughter better. But Emma, I'm so proud of you. What you've built, who you've become. Your grandfather would be over the moon. I hope so. Outside, the November cold had deepened. The family clustered on the sidewalk, saying goodbyes, making tentative plans for Thanksgiving. James approached me, somewhat sheepishly. I meant what I said, about being sorry, he said. And about investing. I actually do have some capital freed up from a recent deal. If you're serious about expansion, send me a proposal, I said. Make it good. I have high standards. He grinned. I'm learning that. Victoria hugged me before she left, whispering, lunch next week. Just us? I want to hear everything. I'd like that, I said. One by one they dispersed to their expensive cars, their comfortable lives. I watched them go, then turned back to look at Bella Not, through the windows. Inside, the dining room was still full, people celebrating their own milestones and moments. This was my legacy, not just the business success, but the spaces I'd created for human connection. My phone buzzed. A text from Antonio. Staff wants to know if the owner will be doing the late-night kitchen walkthrough tonight. I smiled and typed back. Wouldn't miss it. See you at midnight. I walked back to my Honda, past the Mercedes and Tesla, unlocked it with the key fob that was held together with electrical tape. The engine turned over with its familiar rattle. In the rearview mirror, I could see my reflection. Target sweater, no makeup to speak of, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. I looked exactly like myself, successful on my own terms, comfortable in my own skin, unburdened by the need to prove anything to anyone. The Thompson Hospitality headquarters was 10 minutes away. I had revenue reports to review, architect plans to finalize, and a midnight kitchen walkthrough to conduct. Tomorrow, I'd meet with my executive team about the expansion timeline. Next week, lunch with Victoria. Next month, the opening of restaurant number 7. But tonight, I'd reclaimed something I hadn't realized I'd lost. My family's respect, not because they discovered my wealth, but because they finally confronted their own assumptions about success, worth, and what it means to truly know someone. I drove through the city streets, past the bright windows of my other restaurants, toward the converted warehouse that most people mistook for a storage facility, home and office and the headquarters of everything I'd built. The quarterly revenue reports could wait until morning. Tonight, I had family to think about, and a future to plan, and a business to run.
And tomorrow.
When Victoria inevitably asked how I'd managed to build all this, while they all thought I was struggling, I'd tell her the truth. I built it because they thought I was struggling. Because nobody expected anything from me. Because in the freedom of low expectations, I'd found the space to exceed them all. The salt air carried the sound of laughter and clinking champagne glasses across the deck of the Malibu beach house. I stood in the kitchen, arranging shrimp on a platter while my father held court on the weathered teak deck outside, gesturing expansively at the ocean view he believed he now owned. This property has been in our family for 40 years. Dad's voice boomed through the open French doors. My father built this house with his own hands, and now, finally, it's back where it belongs. With me. 80 family members had driven from across California for what Dad called his new ownership celebration. Cousins I hadn't seen in years. Aunts and uncles. My brother Marcus and his wife Jennifer, who'd flown in from Seattle specifically for this moment. Even Great Aunt Dorothy had made the trip from San Diego, her walker carefully positioned beside her deck chair. I was 29 years old, supposedly the family disappointment. While my brother had become a successful corporate attorney, I'd spent the last 7 years playing around with real estate, as my mother liked to say. I lived modestly in a small apartment in Santa Monica, drove a 10-year-old Honda, and rarely talked about my work. Emma, my mother's sharp voice cut through my thoughts. The ice is running low. Do something useful for once. I wiped my hands on a kitchen towel. I'll get more from the garage freezer. At least she can follow simple instructions, Jennifer muttered to my brother, loud enough for me to hear. They both laughed. The garage was detached, a small structure 50 feet from the main house. As I walked across the crushed shell driveway, I checked my phone. The text I'd been waiting for had arrived 15 minutes ago. Inspector Davis arriving at 4:30 p.m. Permits ready for review. It was 4:22 p.m. I took my time gathering ice, listening to my father's voice carry across the property. He was telling the story of how he'd reclaimed the beach house, a story that bore no resemblance to reality. My foolish father left the property to Emma in his will, Dad explained to the captive audience. A 22-year-old girl, with no sense of responsibility. She let it fall into disrepair, couldn't even afford the property taxes. So I did what any good father would do. I paid off her debts and took ownership. Today makes it official. Applause rippled across the deck. The truth was considerably different. My grandfather, Robert Harrison, had indeed built this house in 1984. He'd been a master carpenter, and every beam, every window frame, every custom cabinet bore the mark of his craftsmanship. The house was his masterpiece. 3 bedrooms, floor-to-ceiling windows, facing the Pacific, a deck that seemed to float above the sand. Grandfather had watched his only son, my father, grow into a man obsessed with status and appearance. Dad worked in commercial real estate development, the kind that turned beach communities into high-rise condos and turned coastlines into private clubs. Grandfather had despised everything my father's career represented. When grandfather died 7 years ago, he left the beach house to me, with explicit instructions in his will. Emma understands what this house means. She'll protect it. My father had been furious. He'd contested the will, claiming grandfather had been mentally incompetent. The legal battle had lasted 18 months and cost him over $200,000 in attorney fees. He lost, but Dad never accepted defeat. For 6 years, he tried every method he could devise to take the property. He'd offered to manage it for me. He'd suggested I was too young to handle the responsibility. He'd claimed the maintenance costs would bankrupt me. When I'd refused every offer, he'd started telling people I was letting the property deteriorate, that I was irresponsible, that I didn't deserve grandfather's gift. What my father didn't know was that I'd taken grandfather's gift seriously. Very seriously. I'd been 22 when I inherited the beach house, fresh out of UCLA, with a degree in business and urban planning. I'd also inherited $60,000 in cash. Money grandfather had specifically earmarked for the property's upkeep. I'd taken that money and enrolled in a real estate investment course. Then another. Then I'd obtained my real estate license. I'd started small, a duplex in Culver City that needed work. I'd learned to evaluate properties, to see potential where others saw problems. I'd learned about zoning laws, permits, coastal regulations, tax advantages. I'd reinvested every profit, building slowly and carefully. The beach house had been my education and my laboratory. I'd obtained every permit required by the California Coastal Commission. I'd replaced the aging septic system with an environmentally compliant version. I'd reinforced the foundation against erosion. I'd installed solar panels and a rainwater collection system. I'd done everything by the book, with proper permits, inspections and documentation. And I'd never told my family any of it. I returned to the kitchen with the ice. Through the window, I could see Dad had moved on to discussing his plans for the property. First order of business, he announced, is banning certain people from the premises. Emma specifically. She's had 7 years to prove herself, and she's failed. As the new owner, I'm establishing boundaries. My mother nodded approvingly. It's time for tough love. Maybe this will finally motivate her to get a real job. Marcus raised his champagne glass. To Dad, finally putting this property to good use. Here, the crowd chorused. I glanced at my phone. 4:28 p.m. My father continued, emboldened by the support. I've already contacted a developer. This single house on a prime lot. It's worth maybe $4 million as is. But with the right permits, we could demolish it and build a modern compound worth $15 million. Maybe 20. Great Aunt Dorothy's face fell. But Robert built this house. It's part of our family history. Sentiment doesn't pay bills, Dorothy, Dad replied. This property's been wasted for 7 years. Time to maximize its potential. What about Emma? My cousin Sophie asked quietly. Doesn't she have a say? Dad's laugh was harsh. Emma forfeited her say when she couldn't handle basic property ownership. I have documentation showing I've been covering the property taxes for 3 years. That gives me legal standing. My attorney has confirmed it. I knew exactly which attorney he meant. Marcus had prepared the documents himself, carefully crafting a narrative of financial dependency and ownership transfer. The documents were impressive. They were also completely fraudulent. I'd been paying the property taxes the entire time, directly from an LLC I'd established in year 2 of my real estate education. The LLC, Pacific Coastal Properties, owned not just this beach house, but 6 other properties along the California coast. My father's documentation would fall apart the moment anyone checked the county tax records. But Dad didn't check. He never checked. He simply assumed that because I drove an old car and lived in a small apartment, I must be struggling. He'd crafted an entire narrative, based on assumptions, and Marcus had built legal documents on that foundation of sand. A knock at the front door interrupted my father's monologue. I walked through the house to answer it. Through the beveled glass, I could see a woman in her 50s, wearing a California Coastal Commission jacket, and carrying a tablet and clipboard. I opened the door. Inspector Davis. Yes. You must be Emma Harrison. She smiled professionally. I'm here for the scheduled permit review. We need to verify ownership for the seawall reinforcement permit application you submitted. Of course. Please come in. My mother appeared in the hallway, her face pinched with confusion. Emma, who is this? This is Inspector Davis. From the Coastal Commission, I said calmly. She's here to review the property permits. You've what? What permits? Mom's voice rose sharply. Your father handles all of that now. Inspector Davis consulted her tablet. According to our records, all permits for this property are registered to Emma Louise Harrison. Has there been an ownership transfer? I'm not aware of. The voices on the deck had quieted. I could feel the attention of 80 family members shifting toward the front door. My father pushed through the crowd, his face flushed from champagne and confidence. I'm Thomas Harrison, the property owner. Whatever permits you need, you can discuss with me. Inspector Davis looked up from her tablet, her expression polite but firm. Mr. Harrison, I'm sorry, but you're not listed as the owner in our system. All permits, and there are quite a few, are registered to Miss Emma Harrison. The property tax records confirm her as the owner of record. Eve what? Deck fell silent. Dad's smile didn't waver, but I saw the first flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. There must be some mistake. I have documentation. Could I see your documentation, please? Inspector Davis. Tone remained professional. Because according to the county assessor's office, the California Coastal Commission, and the state controller's property tax division, Emma Harrison has been the sole owner of this property since February 2019. February 2019, I said quietly, was when grandfather's will cleared probate. My father turned to stare at me, and for the first time in 7 years, I saw genuine confusion on his face. You've been paying the property taxes every year, on time, through Pacific Coastal Properties LLC. You don't have an LLC, Dad said, but his voice had lost its certainty. Actually, I do. I established it in 2020. It manages this property and 6 others along the coast. Marcus pushed forward, his attorney instincts kicking in despite his champagne consumption. That's impossible. You live in a tiny apartment. You drive a car that's practically falling apart. You can't possibly. Eve what? Modestly, because I invest my income in real estate, I said. The apartment costs me $800 a month. The car runs perfectly fine. Why would I waste money on status symbols when I could build actual wealth? Inspector Davis cleared her throat. If I could continue with the permit review. I have several other appointments this afternoon. Of course, I said. Would you like to see the seawall reinforcement area? Yes. And I'll need to verify the solar panel installation permits and the septic system replacement documentation from 2021. My mother's voice was barely a whisper. The solar panels, septic system. The old septic was 40 years old and failing, I explained. I replaced it with an EPA-compliant system 3 years ago. The solar panels went in 2 years ago. They generate enough power to run the entire house and feed excess back to the grid. I get a check from the utility company every month. Dad sank into the nearest chair. The permits, he said slowly. All the permits you mentioned. How many are there? Inspector Davis scrolled through her tablet. Let's see. Septic system replacement, solar installation, foundation reinforcement, deck restoration, rainwater collection system, native plant landscaping, and the pending seawall application. 8 major permits, all properly filed. All inspections passed. This is actually one of the best maintained coastal properties in my jurisdiction. Emma did all that. Great Aunt Dorothy's voice trembled with emotion. Robert would be so proud. I felt my throat tighten. Grandfather taught me that owning property means being a steward, not just a possessor. Every improvement I've made honors his craftsmanship and his values. My father stood abruptly. This doesn't make sense. Your bank statements. You've been checking my bank statements, I asked quietly. Marcus had the grace to look embarrassed. We were concerned about your financial stability. You hacked my personal accounts to justify taking my property, I corrected. And what you saw was one checking account I use for daily expenses. You never saw the LLC accounts. You never saw the property management income. You never saw the appreciation on the 6 coastal properties I own. which are currently valued at approximately $18 million. The number hung in the salt air like a physical presence. Jennifer was the first to break the silence. 18 million. The beach house alone is worth 6 million now. After improvements, I said. The property in Laguna appreciated 300%. The Carmel cottage has doubled in value. I bought a small apartment building in Santa Barbara that generates $45,000 a month in rental income. Inspector Davis smiled slightly. Miss Harrison is being modest. She's known in coastal property management circles as one of the most ethical developers in the state. She actually spoke at our annual conference last year about sustainable coastal preservation. My mother sat down heavily. You spoke at a conference about balancing property rights with environmental protection, I said. It's kind of my specialty. My father's face had gone from flushed to pale. The property taxes I paid. You never paid them, I said gently. You wrote checks to an account you thought was the county, but Marcus set up a holding account in your name. I have the banking records. The checks bounced, all of them. I've been quietly paying the actual taxes while you both built a paper trail of financial support that doesn't exist. Marcus stumbled backward. That's we were trying to establish. Fraudulent ownership claims, I finished. Yes, I know. I have a real estate attorney, not a family member, an actual specialist, who's been documenting everything for 3 years. We were waiting to see how far you'd go. Inspector Davis looked uncomfortable. Perhaps I should step outside while you handle family matters. Actually, I said, could you complete your inspection? I'd like to get that seawall permit approved. Storm season is coming, and I want to protect the foundation. Of course, she gestured toward the deck. Shall we? I led her through the crowd of silent family members. No one met my eyes. The champagne glasses sat forgotten on the deck railing, condensation dripping onto the weathered wood. The inspection took 20 minutes. Inspector Davis examined the erosion patterns, reviewed my engineering reports, and took measurements of the proposed seawall placement. She asked intelligent questions about drainage and environmental impact. She approved every aspect of my application. You'll have your permit within 2 weeks, she said, as we walked back to the house. And Emma, keep doing what you're doing. We need more property owners who actually care about coastal preservation. After she left, I returned to the deck. The party had deflated like a punctured balloon. Aunt Dorothy was crying quietly. My cousins were checking their phones, suddenly desperate to be anywhere else. Marcus and Jennifer were having a whispered argument near the stairs. My father sat alone at the head of the long teak table, staring at the ocean. I pulled out a chair and sat across from him. I really did pay those property taxes, he said finally. I thought I did. You thought a lot of things that weren't true, I replied. You thought I was irresponsible. You thought I was wasting grandfather's gift. You thought I needed to be rescued from my own incompetence. You never said anything. You never told us what you were doing. Would you have believed me? I asked. When I was 22, would you have listened if I'd said I was building a real estate portfolio? Or would you have told me I was being unrealistic? Dad closed his eyes. I would have told you to get a real job. Exactly. So I stopped trying to convince you. I stopped trying to earn your approval. I just did the work. My mother joined us, her perfectly applied makeup streaked with tears. Why the old car? Why the tiny apartment? Why make us think you were struggling? I wasn't making you think anything, I said. You made assumptions based on your values, not mine. You think wealth means displays of status. I think wealth means security and freedom. We measure success differently. Marcus approached cautiously, his attorney persona stripped away. The documentation I prepared. If you report it. I'm not going to report it, I said. You're my brother. You made a mistake. A significant, potentially criminal mistake, but a mistake nonetheless. Why? His voice cracked. After what we did. Because grandfather taught me that family isn't about punishment. It's about truth and accountability. I stood looking out at the family, scattered across the deck. But there need to be changes. I raised my voice so everyone could hear. This house stays in my ownership. The plans to demolish it and build a compound. Never happening. This house is going on the National Register of Historic Places. I've already started the application process. Dad looked up sharply. You can't. I can. And I will. Grandfather built something meaningful here. It deserves to be protected. I turned to address the whole group. However, this house is still a family gathering place. Anyone who wants to visit is welcome. Anyone who wants to help maintain it is doubly welcome. But the toxic assumptions, the financial manipulation, the disrespect, that ends today. Great Aunt Dorothy wiped her eyes. Robert would have handled it exactly like this. I hope so, I said. He taught me everything that matters. The party dissolved slowly. Cousins hugged me with whispered apologies. Aunts and uncles promised to stay in better touch. Sophie asked if she could visit next weekend to help with the native plant garden I'd installed. By sunset, only my immediate family remained. Mom, Dad, Marcus and Jennifer. We sat on the deck as the Pacific turned gold and crimson. The silence heavy, but not hostile. I need to understand, Dad said finally. 18 million in property. How? So I told them. I explained the duplex in Culver City that I'd bought for 300,000, renovated myself, and sold for 550. I explained how I'd used that profit to buy a small cottage in Laguna that the previous owner thought was worthless because it needed foundation work. I explained the Santa Barbara apartment building I'd purchased in foreclosure and brought back to habitability. I explained the hundreds of hours I'd spent learning building codes, studying market trends, attending city planning meetings. I explained the relationships I'd built with contractors, inspectors, and environmental specialists. You did all this yourself? Mom asked. No partners, no investors, just me and the knowledge grandfather gave me about craftsmanship and integrity. I looked at my father. You taught me about real estate too, Dad. You taught me what not to do. Every property you wanted to demolish for profit, every community you wanted to displace for development, I learned to do the opposite. Dad flinched but didn't argue. The beach house, Marcus said. If it's worth 6 million now, and you've put all that work into it, are you going to sell? Never, I said. This is grandfather's legacy. This is where I learned what it means to build something that lasts. This is home. Jennifer spoke for the first time in an hour. I'm sorry for everything I said, for how I treated you. Apology accepted, I said. But Jennifer, if you and Marcus want to rebuild our relationship, it starts with honesty. No more assumptions. No more checking my accounts. No more legal schemes. Agreed, Marcus said quietly. We watched the sun sink below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The beach house glowed in the fading light, every window and beam exactly as grandfather had designed it, 42 years ago. What happens now? Mom asked. Now, I smiled. Now we have Sunday dinners here, once a month. You help me maintain the garden. We teach the younger cousins about carpentry and coastal ecology. We build something real together instead of fighting over something none of you actually owned. Dad stood and walked to the deck railing. For a long moment, he stared at the ocean. When he turned back, his eyes were wet. Your grandfather saw something in you. I missed, he said. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for all of it. I know, I said, and we'll work through it. But Dad, the next time someone in this family does something unconventional, maybe ask questions before making assumptions.
Oh,
He nodded slowly. As darkness fell, we moved inside. I made coffee while Mom started gathering the abandoned champagne glasses. Marcus and Jennifer tackled the leftover food. We worked in comfortable silence, cleaning up the debris of Dad's failed ownership party. Around midnight, as my parents prepared to leave, Dad paused at the front door. Emma, can I ask one more question? Of course. When you spoke at that Coastal Commission conference, what did you talk about? I smiled. I talked about a carpenter who built a beach house in 1984 because he loved the ocean and wanted to create something beautiful. I talked about how real stewardship means protecting what matters, even when it's not profitable. I talked about how the best development is the kind that preserves rather than destroys. You talked about Dad, he said softly, referring to his own father. I talked about grandfather. I confirmed. The whole speech was about him, about what he taught me, about why his values matter more than market rates or development potential. Dad pulled me into a hug, something he hadn't done since I was a child. He really would be proud of you. I hope so, I whispered. That's all I ever wanted. After they left, I walked through the quiet house, running my fingers along the custom cabinets grandfather had built. The wood was still perfect, still solid, still bearing the marks of his careful craftsmanship. I stepped onto the deck and listened to the waves. The seawall permit would come through in 2 weeks. The house would stand for another 40 years, maybe 100. The younger cousins would learn about sustainable development and historic preservation. The family would gather here for Sunday dinners and holidays. And somewhere, I hoped grandfather was smiling. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. Can I really come help with the garden next weekend? I want to learn what you know. I replied immediately. Absolutely. Bring work gloves. I'll teach you everything grandfather taught me. Because that was the real inheritance. Not the house, not the property value, but the knowledge that some things are worth more than their market price. Some things are worth protecting. Some things are worth building slowly and carefully, with your own hands and your own integrity. The beach house stood solid against the night, its foundation reinforced, its system sustainable, its future secure, just as grandfather had intended. The week following the disastrous party brought unexpected developments. On Monday morning, I received a call from my cousin Sophie's mother, Aunt Linda, my father's younger sister. Emma, I owe you an apology, Linda said, without preamble. I knew Thomas was planning something, and I should have warned you. I should have said something years ago about how he talked about you behind your back. I poured myself coffee, settling into my small apartment's only comfortable chair. What did he say? That you were wasting Robert's gift. That you were too naive to handle real property ownership. That you'd probably lose the beach house to foreclosure within 5 years. Linda's voice cracked. I believed him, Emma. We all did. And I'm ashamed of that. Why did you believe him? I asked, genuinely curious, rather than accusatory. Linda was quiet for a moment. Because it fit the story we wanted to believe. Thomas is the successful one, the real estate expert. You were the quiet granddaughter who kept to herself. It was easier to believe his version than to question our assumptions. That's honest, I said. Sophie told me about the garden, about how you've been restoring the native coastal plants grandfather originally landscaped. She said, you know every species by name, every bloom season, every ecological benefit. Linda paused. Robert taught you all that, didn't he? Every Saturday for 10 years, I confirmed. While Dad was at the office building his career, grandfather and I were building that garden. He taught me that native plants don't just look beautiful. They prevent erosion, support local wildlife, reduce water consumption. I remember, Linda said softly. I remember you as a teenager coming back from the beach house with dirt under your fingernails, and that look of absolute contentment on your face. We thought you were just playing. We didn't realize you were learning. Most people didn't. I agreed. Can I come to Sunday dinner next month? Linda asked. I'd like to learn what you're doing with the property, and I'd like to apologize in person. You're already apologizing now. I pointed out. True, but I want to do it properly, at Robert's house where it matters. I smiled. Sunday dinner is open to anyone who wants to build instead of tear down. You're absolutely welcome. After we hung up, I sat thinking about my family's assumptions. They'd seen what they expected to see, because I'd never corrected them. I'd let them believe I was struggling because their beliefs didn't affect my actual reality. But watching my father's face as his certainty crumbled, that had affected him deeply. On Tuesday, Marcus called. I need to tell you something, he said. About the documentation I prepared. Marcus, I meant what I said. I'm not pressing charges. I know, but you should understand how deep it went. He took a breath. Dad asked me to create a paper trail showing financial dependency. At first I thought he just wanted documentation for tax purposes, but then he started talking about challenging the will again, about proving you were an unfit owner. How long ago? I asked. 3 years, right after you refinanced the Laguna property. I set down my coffee cup carefully. How did you know I refinanced? I'd been monitoring your credit, not hacking, just running periodic background checks. When I saw the refinancing, I told Dad. That's when he started the serious planning. Marcus's voice was heavy with shame. I thought I was helping him. I thought we were protecting family assets from your mismanagement, but you never actually looked at what I was managing. I said. No. I saw the refinancing and assumed debt. I didn't see that you'd use the equity to buy the Santa Barbara building. I saw the LLC and assumed it was some small-time operation. I never actually investigated. Why not? I asked. You're a good attorney, Marcus. Why didn't you do the basic due diligence? Because I'm your older brother, he said quietly. Because in my head, you were still the little sister who needed protecting. Because examining my assumptions would have meant admitting I might be wrong about you. I understood that better than he knew. So what happens now? Now I do better, Marcus said. Jennifer and I talked all night Sunday. She pointed out that I've been treating you like an incompetent child for 7 years while you've been building an empire under our noses. She said I needed to decide whether I wanted to be your brother or your adversary. And what did you decide? Brother, he said immediately. If you'll still have me in that role. Of course, I said. But Marcus, being my brother means respecting my choices. It means asking instead of assuming. It means treating me as an equal, not a liability. I understand. And Emma? Your real estate portfolio, I'd like to review it properly. Not to find flaws, but to learn from it. You're doing things I didn't think were possible at your age. They're possible at any age if you're patient and strategic. I said. Grandfather taught me that wealth isn't about speed, it's about sustainability. Will you teach me? Marcus asked. Not as a lawyer looking for angles, but as a brother who wants to understand what his sister has built. Come to the beach house on Saturday, I said. Bring your laptop and your questions. I'll show you the entire operation. That Saturday, Marcus arrived at 9 in the morning, carrying his laptop and a bag from the local bakery. Peace offering, he said, holding up cinnamon rolls. Your favorite. We settled at grandfather's custom-built dining table, and I opened my own laptop. For the next 4 hours, I walked Marcus through every aspect of my real estate portfolio. I showed him the spreadsheets tracking property appreciation, maintenance costs, and rental income. I explained my acquisition strategy, targeting undervalued coastal properties that needed work but had strong bones. I demonstrated my vetting process for tenants in the Santa Barbara building, prioritizing long-term stability over maximum rent. You're leaving money on the table, Marcus observed, looking at the Santa Barbara numbers. You could charge 15% more for these units. I could, I agreed. But then I'd have higher turnover, more maintenance issues, and tenants who resent their rent. Instead, I charge fair rates. My tenants stay for years, and they treat the property with respect. My maintenance costs are 30% below comparable buildings. Marcus made notes. That's actually brilliant. Lower turnover means lower vacancy rates, which means more consistent income. Exactly. Grandfather taught me that being greedy in the short term costs you in the long term. Dad never learned that lesson, Marcus said quietly. No, I agreed. He always looked for the maximum return, regardless of the cost to communities or relationships. We broke for lunch, walking down to the beach with sandwiches. The November air was crisp, the ocean steel gray under overcast skies. Can I ask you something personal? Marcus said as we sat on the sand. Sure. Why didn't you fight back sooner? You had evidence of what Dad and I were doing. You could have stopped it at any point. I considered the question carefully, because fighting back would have meant choosing sides. Declaring war on my own family. I didn't want that. I wanted the truth to emerge naturally. By letting Dad humiliate himself at his own party. By letting reality speak for itself. I corrected. Dad built his entire case on assumptions. When the Coastal Commission inspector arrived, she didn't have any agenda. She just stated facts. The facts contradicted Dad's narrative, and the whole structure collapsed. That's actually pretty sophisticated, Marcus admitted. Most people would have confronted him directly. Direct confrontation would have made me the aggressor. I explained. This way I'm just the person who's been quietly doing the right thing while everyone else was making noise. Marcus threw a pebble into the surf. Jennifer said something similar. She said you played the long game while we were playing checkers. I wasn't playing any game, I said. I was just honoring grandfather's legacy and building something sustainable. The fact that it contradicted Dad's assumptions, that was his problem, not mine. We returned to the house and spent the afternoon reviewing the historic preservation application I'd submitted for the beach house. Marcus read through the documentation with growing respect. "This is museum quality, historical research," he said. "You documented grandfather's construction techniques, his material sources, his design philosophy. You've got photographs from every stage of the original construction." "Grandfather kept meticulous records," I said. "I found them in the garage 3 years ago, in weather-sealed boxes. Every receipt, every blueprint, every decision explained in his handwriting. And you're donating all this to the State Historical Society. After the house is officially registered." "Yes, other preservationists can learn from grandfather's methods. His sustainable construction techniques were 40 years ahead of their time." Marcus shook his head slowly. "You really did understand what he was trying to teach you." "I tried," I said simply. As evening approached, Dad's car pulled into the driveway. Marcus and I exchanged glances. "I called him," Marcus admitted. "I thought he should see what you've built." "I hope that's okay." Dad entered cautiously, like a guest rather than someone who'd claimed ownership a week earlier. "Emma, Marcus said you were reviewing business today." "I won't interrupt." "You're not interrupting," I said. "Would you like to see the portfolio?" Dad looked surprised. "You'd show me. Why wouldn't I? You're my father. You work in real estate. I'd value your professional opinion." We spent 2 hours going through the same presentation I'd given Marcus. Dad asked sharp questions about zoning, development potential, and market positioning. His professional expertise was evident, even as his personal assumptions had been wrong. "The Carmel cottage," Dad said, studying the acquisition documents. "You bought this in foreclosure for $200,000. The previous owner had let it deteriorate badly." I explained. "But the location was prime, and the structure was sound. I spent 6 months doing renovations myself, learning carpentry, plumbing, electrical work. I hired professionals for the technical stuff, but I did everything I legally could on my own." "That's how grandfather taught you," Dad said slowly. "He always said you couldn't manage what you didn't understand." "Exactly. So I learned to understand everything." Dad pulled up the current market valuation. "This cottage is worth $800,000 now. Conservative estimate. A realtor friend thinks it could go for $950 in the current market. That's a 400% return in 6 years." Dad said, his professional awe evident. "That's Emma. That's exceptional work." "Thank you," I said quietly. Dad closed the laptop and looked at me directly. "I need to say something. Not as your father, but as a real estate professional to another professional. Okay. What you've built here is more impressive than anything I've accomplished in 30 years in this industry. You've done it ethically, sustainably, and with genuine respect for the properties and communities involved. I'm not just proud, I'm humbled." I felt tears prick my eyes. "Dad, let me finish," he said gently. "I spent 7 years convinced you were failing because you weren't following my path. I never considered that you might be building a better path. That was arrogance on my part, and it cost us years of relationship we can't get back." "We can build new ones," I said. "I'd like that," Dad replied. "But I need to earn it. So I'm asking, professionally, do you need a consultant? Someone who knows the development side of coastal real estate?" "I wouldn't expect payment. I'd just like to learn what you're doing and maybe contribute something useful." I looked at Marcus, who nodded encouragingly. "Actually," I said, "I'm considering a new project. There's a small commercial building in Ventura, a 1920s structure that's been empty for 5 years. The owner wants to demolish it for a parking lot. But I think it could be restored as mixed-use retail and housing." "Mixed use is tricky," Dad said, his professional interest clearly engaged. "Zoning complications, building code upgrades, accessibility requirements." "Exactly. Which is why I could use someone with experience in commercial development." I pulled up the property listing on my laptop. "What do you think?" Dad studied the listing with the focused intensity I remembered from my childhood, when he'd review properties at the dinner table. After several minutes, he looked up. "This could work. But you'd need significant capital, and the permitting process would be brutal." "I have the capital," I said. "And I'm good with permit processes." What I don't have is experience with commercial tenant relationships and retail lease structures. That I can help with, Dad said. If you're serious about this, I'd be honored to consult. Then let's do it, I said. But Dad, this would be a genuine partnership, not you taking over, not you fixing my mistakes. Actual collaboration. Understood, he said. And Emma, if I start falling into old patterns, treating you as incompetent or trying to take control, you call me on it immediately. Deal? We shook hands across grandfather's table, and something shifted in the room. Not forgiveness exactly, but the beginning of reconstruction. Marcus ordered pizza, and we spent the evening sketching preliminary plans for the Ventura project. Dad's expertise with commercial zoning proved invaluable, while I contributed my knowledge of historic preservation incentives and sustainable building practices. Marcus offered to handle the legal documentation. Around midnight, as we were packing up, Dad paused at one of grandfather's custom cabinets. He built this entire kitchen himself, Dad said softly. Every cabinet, every drawer. I used to think it was a waste of time. Why not just hire professionals and focus on higher value work? And now, I asked. Now I understand, he was teaching you that craftsmanship matters. That doing things right matters more than doing them fast. Dad ran his hand along the cabinet's smooth surface. I wish I'd learned that lesson. You're learning it now, I said. That's what matters. As Dad and Marcus drove away, I stood on the deck listening to the ocean. The beach house felt different now, not just protected, but purposeful. Not just preserved, but actively teaching the next generation. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. Mom told me about Sunday dinners. Can I come this week? I want to learn about the native plants. I smiled and replied, absolutely. Come early, and I'll teach you everything grandfather taught me. Because that was the real victory, not the preserved property, or the successful portfolio, but the knowledge passing forward. The understanding that building something meaningful takes time, patience, and the willingness to do the work yourself. Grandfather had built a beach house that would stand for generations. I was building something even more durable, a family that valued substance over status, relationships over returns, and legacy over profit. The November stars appeared above the Pacific, bright and clear. Inside the beach house, every beam and board stood exactly as grandfather had placed them 42 years ago. Some things, I thought, are worth protecting. Some things are worth building slowly. And some things, the most important things, are worth learning from the ground up, one careful lesson at a time.